Wait, didn't you just review a Sonic game? Oh yeah, I did. I defended Sonic Forces, a game that got pretty heavily bashed by critics. Now don't get me wrong, Forces has its fair share of problems for sure, but it was a lot of fun. I felt the game was good, but not great. If you watched that, I mentioned that I had been working on another review before it came out. And this is that review. And now I'm gonna undoubtedly piss off a lot of people because I'm not so forgiving of this Sonic game. I'm gonna catch so much hell for this. I'd also like to clarify that I'm specifically referring to the HD version, the PS3 version to be exact. The only difference that I know of between it and the 360 version is that the 360 version caps out at 30 frames per second, but supposedly drops even lower frame rate wise than the PS3 version. Mind you, that's what I've heard, and I can't confirm. The performance is crap either way. I'm also not going to comment much on the PS2 and Wii versions, as I've only played the PS2 version briefly. And though I'm told its highs aren't as high, the lows are nowhere near as low, which based on my time with the PS2 version, I can fully believe. Take that as you will. So, we begin with an awesome opening. Seriously, this is the perfect way to start the game. We're not exactly sure how or why Sonic made it up to space to fight Eggman, but who cares? It looks breathtaking with CGI that tops most Hollywood CGI effects even a decade later. Yeah, I said it. We have Sonic snarking it up while giving Eggman a typical hard time. Eggman does manage to snag the hedgehog, but then he turns into Super Sonic and we get even more of a visual treat, accompanied with absolutely stellar music. Seriously, why is Sonic music so damn good? Of course, it seems this was Eggman's plan the entire time, and he springs his trap that causes the emeralds to be pulled from Sonic and proceeds to blow up the planet. Well, sorta. Eggman blasts open the planet, causing the continents to split apart and releases something called Dark Gaia. Oh, and Sonic turns into a werewolf. Werehog. Eggman gloats and tosses Sonic off into space, who then crashes into the planet before being saved by a glowing light. I'm more curious as to how he survived entry into the atmosphere without burning up, but whatever. Sonic logic is never all that consistent. He wakes up to find the Chaos Emeralds have been drained of their power and comes across some kind of pixie poodle. After a moment, we find the poodle has lost his memory and that his voice kinda grates after a while. Sonic names the thing Chip, after the chocolate variety, after he shows a rather questionable interest in an ice cream cone. Something you've probably noticed by now is Sonic Unleashed has a pretty easygoing tone. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but at times it causes the smallest bit of mood whiplash. The planet's been split into pieces and everyone is just kinda chill about it. The game also forces in a lot of slapstick humor at weird times. Sometimes it works, but other times it just feels really out of place. From here, you find yourself in a hub world. Now, I'm mostly okay with hubs in Sonic games, but much like Sonic 06, these ones limit your speed. While these are the smallest the hubs have ever been, the fact that you can't even run in these most of the time is obnoxious. They aren't as bad as 06's, but it's still a chore. Luckily, as said before, they're small and you can make a jump to the first stage, not counting the tutorial stage that occurred shortly after the opening, pretty quickly. However, before reaching each of the new levels, you have to go through an entrance stage. These are basically a different part of the hubs. Here you can use some of your abilities more freely. And you can also die. Yay. Despite my lack of enthusiasm, these areas, again, aren't terrible. This is where you'll generally find your new daytime abilities, the wall jump and such, similar to Sonic Adventure. It works well enough, but what really hurts is you need to collect medals to get into the actual stages. The medals are split between Sun and Moon medals correlating to the day or night stages. The main problem with this is you don't get any for just completing the levels. You have to go out of your way to look for them. Some can be found in the hubs and entrance stages, but you'll need to get most of them from the actual levels. Expect to frequently replay stages to find more. It can be tough to find them in the daytime stages because Sonic moves so damn fast. But at the same time, it's annoying to find them in the werehog stages because replaying and exploring the nighttime levels is tedious. But daytime Sonic stages? These are awesome. No, seriously, when you're actually allowed to cut loose, the game is pretty damn great. While I don't care much for the boost to win aspect, the sense of speed is mind-blowing, and it looks great. Seriously, this game looks incredible. Until you notice the frame rate chugging more than a frat bro at a kegger. Now, for the most part, the frame rate is fine during the daytime stages. You'll notice a drop here and there, but it won't become too much trouble until you get to, like, Adamat. Sonic starts with just the ability to run real fast, use the homing attack, along with sliding and crawling. You can also use a spin kick, but it's not particularly useful. Later on, you'll also unlock a wall jump, stomp, air boost, and the lightspeed dash. This mostly works well, except the homing attack uses the same button as the boost. I like the idea of the homing attack using its own button instead of the jump button, but using the boost button occasionally just causes you to fly off into oblivion instead of smacking the enemy you wanted to. Mercifully, this isn't too common, and certainly never happens as much as trying to lightspeed dash and winding up using the bounce attack to your death over an open pit in Sonic 06. Unfortunately, Sonic controls a bit too loosely. Sometimes it feels like his jump is delayed, or you'll wind up not pressing the button hard enough and he'll just bunny hop. Or you'll try bunny hopping and he'll do a full jump. But the worst part is, Sonic sometimes just won't stop or turn around. This is especially bad on certain turns where you don't have much control over Sonic when he's moving fast. And I don't even mean when boosting. Sometimes he'll even miss stuff like grind rails when you're boosting, though this is also thankfully a rare occurrence. He does have a drift that helps a little, but sometimes he just flat out refuses to turn no matter what you do. It's not game-breaking, but it is annoying. Despite the control issues, the game is still controllable enough to be fun in most cases. There's also the occasional QuickTime event. Yep, it has QTEs. Ugh. Now you may be giving me a dirty look since I didn't say anything bad about the QuickTime events in Sonic Forces in that game's review. Well, the truth is, I kind of forgot about them. Yeah, my bad. There's a reason for that, though. All the QuickTime events in Sonic Forces do is grant you extra points and maybe make you wind up at a different spot. You're given a lot of time, perhaps even too much, to finish them. Meanwhile, in Sonic Unleashed, a few of these aren't a problem, but later on, failing a QuickTime event on the daytime stages will just wind up getting you killed, and you're often barely given just enough time to react. After you clear the stage, you get another cutscene as the sun goes down, and the werehog comes out.
Sonic? Whoa, Mr. Monster Guy is back!
You find Tails being harassed by some Dark Gaia monsters, and of course need to go save his twin-tailed butt. You accomplish this with a pretty bad beat-em-up stage. Okay, in all fairness, the first couple werehog stages are passable. They're clunky, but playable for the most part. Let me preface this by saying something. I don't think the werehog is a terrible concept. It's not something doomed from the get-go. I'm not someone who thinks the game should have had Knuckles or Shadow necessarily in his place, but the execution is bad. Basically, it's a poor man's God of War. If you're hoping for some Devil May Cry level of combat, you'd best look elsewhere. Like at Devil May Cry. It doesn't help that the frame rate is at its absolute worst when playing as the werehog. Tons of shit is on screen constantly, and really none of it is interesting. It's not quite a straight-up button masher, but it's not far from that. You have your basic light attack, heavy attack, and can use pre-stringed combos. It's clunky and there's no lock-on, but it basically works. It's just not very much fun because there's very little variety to the enemies. The werehog can also block and from there dodge, which can help, but doesn't have a ton of use, especially when later on normal foes can outright ignore your defense. You also have a context-sensitive grab. The grab can be used to pick up small or off-guard normal enemies, and you can chuck them or hammer them around. The other use for them is the critical attacks. The critical attacks suck. Oh, sure, you'll instantly kill an enemy when you use it, but this comes at a cost. When you first get an enemy to critical status, usually around 50% of their health, pressing grab in front of them triggers a QuickTime event. And can any of you tell me what happens when you have to do a split-second QTE with chuggy frame rate? To make things more obnoxious, if you fail the QTE prompt, the enemy not only is able to counterattack, but they recover a large chunk of their health. Now, in all fairness, the QuickTime events are slower the lower the enemy's health. But there were still times where the QTE meter would appear half empty when I was in a large crowd, due to the terrible choppiness. To make things worse, every single one of them is identical for that enemy class. Even when you start fighting upgraded enemies, they have the same exact animations. And frankly, by the time you finish the first werehog stage, you've seen most of the enemy types. You'll eventually face annoying healing white mage type enemies, who seem to respawn 3 times every time you fight one, wasps that dodge most of your attacks, and then some tubby enemies that are just damage sponges, but aren't much of a threat themselves. It doesn't help that when you use a critical attack in a crowd, you could be setting yourself up for cheap damage. While enemies can't hurt you during the animation, there's a moment afterwards where Werehog Sonic can't move or attack, and it's not uncommon to get hit multiple times here. You can block, but you're shit out of luck if they decide to ignore your shield. You can also trigger Sonic's Unleashed mode. This is helpful. Think of it as the equivalent to Devil May Cry's Devil Trigger, although not quite as good. It makes him tougher to hurt and deals more damage. But admittedly, there were times I even forgot this was a thing. There's also parts where you have to balance carefully and walk across small platforms. These can be annoying since the camera is almost always absolute shit here, leading to cheap deaths. Sometimes you can jump to another platform and grab, when the grab works. Sometimes it just doesn't for whatever reason, and it drives me absolutely batshit when I should be able to keep from plummeting to my death. At the end of the stage, you fight your first large enemy. This isn't particularly hard, though it's annoying how pretty much every one of his attacks can knock you to the ground, and you have to mash X to get back up. And when he knocks you down, about 75% of the time he'll follow it up with a shockwave that knocks you down again. Still, the first couple werehog stages aren't horrible. They're not good, but they're mostly playable. Mostly. But man, do they drag themselves out. Amusingly, unless you die at the absolute end of the stage, expect to still frequently see high scores on these stages. I can only assume Sonic Team realized how ass they are and decided to throw the player a bone. You may have also noticed that whenever you beat an enemy, they drop weird little yellow crystals. These are experience points. Yeah, the game has experience points. I don't hate this idea. I actually kind of like the idea of upgrading my stats and skills. The problem is, to get the most XP, you have to play as the werehog, who generally gets huge chunks of experience points, such as 10 or so bars in his first stage, as opposed to normal Sonic, who is lucky to get maybe a third of that. Now granted, there is an exploit you can use to your advantage regarding a wandering merchant, and the food items you can buy, which bestow XP when consumed, but it still takes forever to level up some of the higher stats. My suggestion? Focus primarily on the werehog until you can do the exploit. Upgrading the werehog's health and damage will stop a lot of the frustration. Oh, and I hope you like the jazzy werehog fight theme, because it plays every single time you get into a normal fight. Here, Sonic meets up with Tails, and the two of you set off to find someone who may know about what's going on. The ridiculously named Professor Pickle. This is followed by a brief flying section, and by flying section, I mean QuickTime Event Fest. This one actually isn't too bad, at least, and it's fairly easy and forgiving. You head to Spagonia to find him, only to learn Eggman kidnapped him. You have to talk to one of the NPCs who tell you that Eggman took him to Missouri, so you head off to there. Can I just stop to talk about something here? Okay, so I think the game looks great. It's spectacular looking with gorgeous graphics, when the frame rate isn't pooping out. It has stellar lighting and the models are so on point. I think the locations and their variety is such a wonderful treat. But my goodness, I hate the Pixar-esque humans in this game. Now admittedly, Sonic 06 looked a little bit weird with a cartoonish hedgehog running around with realistic humans, but he's been hanging out with mostly properly proportioned humans since Sonic Adventure, and nobody really bitched about it until '06. This is just a nitpick, of course, but I don't like the human characters in this game. Maybe I'm just too used to games like Sonic Adventure, but I don't care much for these designs. Except the shopkeeper in Empire City.
I'm high as hell right now. I swore I just sold like 99 steaks to a talking blue hedgehog and a pixie poodle.
Once you arrive in Missouri, you have to do another werehog stage. Upon completion, you rescue Professor Pickle. It turns out Dark Gaia is a being who pops out every ancient prophecy number of years or so and screws up the planet. It unleashes negative energy on the world. After a cutscene back in Spagonia, you need to head back to Missouri. This is another gripe I have with the game. You have to constantly return to Professor Pickle to trigger new areas, rather than just unlocking them. Sonic finds Eggman giving trouble to the locals. You give chase through another daytime stage. And the game is awesome again! After completing it, you come across the first boss fight. The boss battle is nothing special, but it's entertaining enough. It basically auto-scrolls forward, with you needing to occasionally use Sonic's boost to get close to Eggman. When it goes to hit you with his robot's pincers, you need to smack him with a homing attack. Easy enough. At one point, he'll flip the camera to a 2D scrolling section where you have to dodge crap until he pops up in front of you. Pop him again, and it'll switch back. Rinse and repeat. Again, nothing special, but it works. It gives a great sense of speed at the very least. On the downside, the daytime boss battles get a little bit too busy at times. It's tough trying to keep track of everything because a lot of Eggman's projectiles don't really stand out. Still, it functions well enough. After you beat the boss, Sonic uses a Chaos Emerald and a temple related to Dark Gaia to restore one of the continents. From here, you'll wind up repeating basically the same process with each area. Do a daytime stage, get a key. Do a nighttime stage, get a key. Do a boss fight. Go talk to Professor Pickle. Rinse and repeat. At one point, Pickle moves to Shamar. I have no idea what the purpose of this is, especially since the go-to lab option on the world map still takes you back to Spagonia. Speaking of boss fights, the werehog bosses are actually pretty good. While the daytime Sonic bosses are essentially rehashes of one another with slight differences, the werehogs have a bit more clever thought behind them. Fighting a phoenix by dousing him with water and beating the crap out of him. Facing a Hydra with an ice blast by using the cold against him. Using totems to defeat an otherwise immortal boss. These are fairly intelligent and well thought out. The only downside is pretty much all of them have QuickTime events, but these are probably the easiest ones in the game, and you at least get a visual treat for it. That's not to say the daytime bosses are bad, it's just that they're essentially the same boss with slight differences. They work well enough, but it still mostly turns into run up to them really fast and bop them. The game follows this pattern for a while, until you get to Empire City. Empire City at night is where the game really starts to turn to crap. I know I keep harping on the frame rate, but good grief! It's here where it starts to become almost impossible to tell what's going on. And here where they started to go overboard with platforming as the werehog. Now you might be wondering why I don't have a lot of werehog footage, and pretty much none from the later werehog stages. This is because I knew these would take up the majority of the game, that I would die a lot, and that I was already running low on space on my USB drive where I store my footage. And I was right. It's Empire City's nighttime stage where I began to really hate playing as the werehog. From this point on, the game only gets worse. While daytime Sonic is still mostly fun, the werehog becomes worse and worse with each one. The camera starts to move at the worst possible time during the balancing sections, and I'm pretty sure Sonic Team knew how bad it was. Before almost every single irritating part, you'll start finding tons of extra lives. They had to have known the stage design was ass here, or you wouldn't have infinite spawning lives. Expect to die again, and again, and again, and again. And unfortunately, once you get to Adabat, even daytime Sonic starts to become a chore. Not because of poor design or anything, although the waterfall area wants to make an argument toward that, but because the frame rate mixed with the loose controls makes it difficult to tell where you're going most of the time. It's a shame because the stage seems pretty fun when you can tell what's going on, but good lord, half the time it's just a blurry mess. Despite wanting very badly to quit and play something else, I did also want to finish the game and do up this review. At this point, I'll admit, I was having very, very little fun. It took a while just to be able to play this stage because I wound up having to search for medals. I don't know why this is a thing in this game. I can only assume it's because sometimes Sonic Team is a bit stupid. I did, however, run into a funny glitch while trying to find more medals. I should also mention the side missions and such here. First are the hot dog cart missions. There's a few different styles, such as time trials, get a certain number of rings and beat the stage, or defeat a certain number of enemies, all without dying. These aren't too bad for the most part, although a few select stages are outright sadistic. There's also the extra acts. These are basically super difficult challenge missions, and are pretty good. They're usually short, but require a decent amount of skill to complete. Not a lot of payoff, just occasionally finding a few medals or a collectible, but they're fun optional missions. Speaking of collectibles, there's quite a number of them, but it's not really worth getting most of them beyond the records and videotapes, which unlock a gallery that allows you to listen to the excellent soundtrack or watch the pretty good cutscenes. Then you have a few NPC missions, be it from talking to them or flashing them with a camera at night. These are usually time trials in a small location, ranging from climb shit to kill shit. These are okay, but aren't particularly interesting. Anyway, back at the story, we find out that Chip is Dark Gaia's mirror, like Gaia. Why he manifested as a food-obsessed poodle, I don't know, but whatever. It's a Sonic game, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Sonic agrees to help Chip restore the planet, yada yada yada. Head back to Professor Pickle, who tells you the last temple is smack dab in the center of Eggman's new headquarters, and then talk to Tails to go through another QTE flying section, which really isn't any different from the first. And we arrive in Eggmanland, and I'm gonna say it, I hate this level. I hate this level so much. Okay, initially on my run through Eggmanland, I had pretty much no footage except for the ending, because I knew it was going to take a while. Most people suggested that it would take around 45 minutes to an hour. And it did. I went back and did the whole stage over again. I did this because words cannot fully describe everything wrong with Eggmanland. Every single problem with this game is magnified 100-fold in this stage. The frame rate is consistently shitting the bed here. The bed is no longer one you can sleep in. This bed is more shit than bed. Adabat is telling them they need to replace the frame rate shit bed. The normal Sonic sections are full of slideshow frame rate issues, leaps of faith, cheap instant deaths, and QuickTime events. There were times where Sonic simply wouldn't respond to jump commands, wouldn't go the direction that I tried to make him go, and would fly off edges. And this was still the quote-unquote good part of the stage. You have to switch between that and the werehog form, and if you thought the camera and platforming bits with the werehog was bad before, you have no idea. I swear, grabbing onto ledges and such only works here when it wants to, and while I have no video proof of it, there were times where the ground simply wouldn't appear under me, and while it didn't kill me, it of course freaked me out. I was legit worried my PS3 was gonna die on me. At least a few times when I killed enemies with a critical attack, Sonic would appear outside of the game area or floating over a pit. It does seem like Sega implemented something that would warp him back to where he was to prevent you from dying, but it felt sloppy either way. At one point, I found a blocked off area with infinitely spawning enemies. I thought it was just a survival gauntlet at first. I wasted about 5 lives trying to survive. It didn't help that if an enemy shot the barrels that contained items, the items would eventually disappear, meaning if it got broke open, I wasn't going to be able to save that health for when I really needed it. And admittedly, I rage quit here the first time I tried. I spent most of the next day using the exploit for easy money so I could buy tons of food and max out my XP. It was a slog, but after countless grilled steaks, I maxed out Sonic's stats. This did make the process a little less frustrating, but the level still gave me a migraine with all its sloppiness. When I got back to the area with infinite spawns, I found out there was a breakable wall with a switch. The wall was a gigantic pink thing that just looked like part of the background, to be honest. There wasn't any real indication that it was breakable, and I just lucked into it and continued on my not-so-merry way. Before every one of the most frustrating parts, there's almost always an extra life that infinitely respawns. You might think, oh, well, wouldn't that make it easy? It doesn't! It just means you won't get a game over. It's still gonna be a torture session. Not long after that part is more platforming. Except this one, you can't see shit. It's again got a leap of faith, followed by a part where you have to swing off enemy heads. This wouldn't be so bad, except some of them shoot at you, so you have to be quick. The last part of the stage is mercifully just a few mooks and a Gaia Titan. I think that's what they're called anyway, followed by more mooks and 2 Titans. I found this comparably easier thanks to having plenty of unleashed power, though the annoying healing wizard things appear, so you may want to take them out first. Still, this was probably the least difficult part of the stage. Oh, and I got an A rank on this somehow. Yeah, I have no clue! I died a million times, and it took forever to finish the stage. Afterwards, we jump into 3 boss fights in a row. The first one is another werehog battle, this time against Eggman's Egg Dragoon. This one is pretty easy, but it's also kind of fun, and it's a nice change of pace from the terrible Eggmanland abomination. Dark Gaia appears and slaps Eggman out of the way, and proceeds to steal Sonic's werehog energy. Chip summons the Gaia temples to him in some sort of silly ancient Voltron transformation, and you take control of him. This part isn't too bad. Don't bother trying to punch the meteors Dark Gaia tosses, it's too slow and delayed. Just either try dodging or blocking them as you boost your way to Dark Gaia. Eventually he'll shoot a mouth beam at you. Block before he does and just slide out of the way of it. You have to do a QTE once you get close, but it's by no means a bad one, though the 3rd time gets a little bit quick. After you do a QuickTime event, you switch over to Sonic, where you have only a few seconds to get to the end of an area, or you die instantly. And expect to die and hear the same dialogue multiple times here. Thankfully, these are short at least, but if you're not pitch perfect, you're pretty much screwed. It doesn't help that there's a bit of RNG since you can get hit with random Dark Gaia pulses that knock you down, and Sonic takes a sweet time getting back up. At least if you die, you start at the beginning of that particular segment instead of having to start over from the beginning. Once you've accomplished this 3 times, Dark Gaia decides, "Fool, this is not even my final form!" To which Sonic responds, "Not impressed, I can do it too!" And this final boss sucks. Okay, admittedly the first few times I tried this, I missed the rings lining the area before you get to Dark Gaia's shield, which does make the fight a little easier. But only a little. You see, normally Super Sonic can only take 3 or so hits here. He has a life gauge instead of the collect more rings to fight longer. If you collect enough rings to max out his health gauge, he gets an extra life, so you can at least keep trying. You have a limited amount of time to win this, or Dark Gaia kills Chip. Again, the game expects you to be perfect. On more than one occasion, I'd finish the shield generating snakehead things, only for Chip to die because I took too long. Worse yet, everything hurts you here. Run into a meteor, lose health. Run into a snakehead without boosting, lose health. This wouldn't be so bad, except you can't see where you're going and you run into everything while boosting. But you have to boost or you won't have enough time. But when you boost, Sonic will frequently target the nearest head, whether or not there's something in the way. And the heads can retract, so you wind up having to wait, or you have to go try finding another one, and hopefully it won't retract while you're trying to kill it. And every time you fail, expect to hear the same stupid dialogue every single time. No shit, Rock Sherlock! Once the shield goes down, you're met with another QuickTime event. And while it starts out decently enough, at the end, you gotta tap pretty fast, ending with you absolutely needing to mash a button 60 times in a short amount of time before you charge at him again. With that, perfect Dark Gaia is defeated, and the world is on its way to being restored. However, Chip must remain behind, as he is as much a part of the planet as Dark Gaia is. He flings Sonic out of the area in a rather comical fashion. Once again, mood whiplashes in what's supposed to be a somewhat somber scene. Sonic gets a memento from Chip that is completely ignored in subsequent entries in the series and runs off with Tails, following in the tornado to the tune of the awesome Endless Possibility as the credits begin to run, which is actually a really satisfying ending. A lot of people refer to Sonic Unleashed as half of a good game. I refer to these people as half correct. The game did a lot to restore faith in the franchise after several years of mediocre titles and flops like Sonic 06. But there is just so much wrong here. Now, don't misunderstand me. The daytime stages are great, and the presentation is top-notch. I am glad the game exists, because it led to the much more refined Sonic generations. But there's so many technical problems, and the werehog sucks! It sucks, guys! The werehog is not fun! There are really good aspects here. The RPG-like experience system is kinda neat. The daytime stages are well designed and barf-inducingly fast in the right ways. The story is dumb, but presented well despite the overabundance of cartoonish humor. The music, it's so damn good. The things that this game does well, it does really well. But you spend so much time in a poor beat-em-up with the werehog, or trying to hunt down medals just so you can play the game. Or worse yet, trying to deal with the terrible framerate issues. And mind you, I try not to focus too much on framerate problems with games, but you have to wonder how this got out the door and never got patched with this kind of performance. This is Skyrim on the PlayStation 3 bad. This makes Sonic Heroes on the PS2 look like a technical marvel. This is worse than Crysis on a potato laptop. Okay, that last one may have been an over-exaggeration. And Eggmanland. Just all of that stage. Before you even think about it, no, I don't hate the stage because it's hard. I can appreciate challenging games. One of my favorite games of all time is Devil May Cry 3, a game that I went through the hardest difficulty on. But I can't say that about Eggmanland. The difficulty didn't come from legitimate, well-designed challenge. It came from horrible design and performance issues and frustrating, broken gameplay. I recognize that in most ways, Sonic Unleashed is a better game than Sonic Forces, a game that I had a lot of nice things to talk about. But Unleashed, despite its better stage design and a wealth of content, I can't recommend it, because after a certain point, I just was not having fun with this game. So much of it is just pure, irritating frustration. The poor performance is something that I could look past, if only the game were better, but the werehog drags it down so much. The last quarter or so of the game goes right down the crapper, and the medal hunting ruins the pacing. I want to recommend it, but for everything it does right, it does at least 2 or 3 more things wrong. The worst I can say about Sonic Forces is that it ends as quickly as it begins, and while you can easily argue that it's far too linear, perhaps even being boring and disappointing, you certainly can't accuse it of being full of padding or frustration. I think the game did do a lot of good for the franchise. While I'm not as fond of the boost gameplay as, say, the adventure games, it was probably the best we'd gotten since 2001 in terms of 3D Sonic. And they used it to craft the amazing Sonic generations. Graphically, it still looks gorgeous, and the FMVs put big budget movies to utter shame. And the soundtrack is so brilliantly composed. I want to say that I like Sonic Unleashed, but I hate more than half the game. And yes, it's more than half, because for every 5 minutes you spend in the daytime stages, you'll get bare minimum double that as the werehog. That, combined with the obnoxious QuickTime events, the entirety of Eggmanland, and a pretty mediocre finale. If you really want to play Sonic Unleashed, you may want to look into the PS2 or Wii version of the game. Same story, but the gameplay does differ and is reportedly nowhere near as frustrating. The performance is a lot more uniform, although I can only say I know of this to a small degree because I've played it in limited amounts. If you absolutely must play the PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 version, I'd recommend you just go and get a save file off of like Game FAQs or something, and then watch the cutscenes while playing the daytime stages and bosses. It's not worth playing the rest of the game. This review actually wound up being a lot more negative than I originally intended. I started the game over from the beginning, and finally went through the rest of the game, having previously lost interest around Adabat. And part of me wishes I had just let it be. I always disliked the werehog, but by the time I finished this, I outright hated some of his stages, and a sizable part of the rest of the game besides. It's not the worst thing to come from the franchise, and there are really good aspects to it. But after a while, I kept just wishing I was playing Sonic Adventure or Sonic Generations instead. It feels like Sonic Unleashed is a good game buried under a bad game buried under padding. It still could have been so much worse though. Ew. Whether you agree or disagree with me, thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you haven't already, check out me saying nice things about the also divisive Sonic Forces. Or maybe check out my playthrough of the awesome Sonic Mania. Or since I mentioned it, how about watching me rage at Devil May Cry 3's hardest difficulty as it kicks my ass?